We're streaming live from the Studio 2 of Filmakademie Baden-Württemberg, which is actually not in Stuttgart, but in Ludwigsburg. The Tech Talks have been initiated to bridge the gap between research results and their practical application in media productions. And usually we are located in the Gutbrot locations in Stuttgart. That's where we meet. But today we thought it's a nice idea to show you the setup that we've built here in Studio 2 of Filmakademie, which is a 4 by 10 meter curved LED wall for virtual production. Yeah, virtual production is a rapidly evolving technology, and after basic years of research, we see a lot of application, especially for in-camera visual effects, where green screen has been replaced by large-scale LED walls. What are the challenges of producing for virtual production, and what is the requirement for upcoming talent and for us as educators? That's one of the questions that we'll ask today. And then also, can virtual production technologies even contribute to green shooting and the overall sustainability effort? We've prepared the following talks for you. We start with a virtual production one-on-one. Behind the scenes of Pixomondo's virtual production showcase by Christoph Schmidt. He's head of 3D and visual effects, set supervisor at Pixomondo in Stuttgart. Then we'll have a virtual presentation on green shooting and virtual production by Gassmann. He's an international director, producer, green film production expert and teacher. And finally, we'll have a combination of smaller presentations from students of the Film Academy, set extension workshop, and the final year project, Cyber City Love Story. They are in preparation to work with this setup during the next weeks, and they'll give you insights in their preparation and how they're intending to work with the setup. And then lastly, Simon Spielmann, my colleague from the R&D team, he will tell you a few hard facts on the setup and also give you insight in upcoming tools from our R&D group. Talks are scheduled for 15 minutes. There will be 5-minute Q&A, and for the virtual guests, please use the YouTube chat so you can ask the questions there, and I'll ask them to the speaker then later on. So let's get started with Christoph from Pixomondo.
Hello. So yeah, welcome to my presentation about Pixomondo's work in the field of virtual production, and also about our virtual production showcase that we did around 1 year ago. So the button does not, it works. Okay, so Volker already introduced me. My name is Christoph Schmidt. I'm head of 3D at Pixomondo in Stuttgart. I'm also VFX set supervisor. And one thing I wanted to mention at this point is that I attended the 3rd Unreal Fellowship for Virtual Production last year, which was basically for me the start of using a game engine in my professional career, I would say. I want to start. I think that thing doesn't work. I'll use the buttons here. I want to start with a little introduction about Pixomondo, super small. So basically we are located around the globe. We have our headquarters in Los Angeles. We have studios in Canada, which are Vancouver, Toronto, and Montreal. And we are located in Germany, in Stuttgart and in Frankfurt. And another location is missing at this chart here at the moment. This is London. It's what we are about to open at this moment. And London is interesting in terms of virtual production because we will build another LED stage there that will be run by Pixomondo. In general, Pixomondo is running already 3 stages in Canada. So we have 2 really big ones, Toronto 1 and Vancouver 1, and we have a 3rd one called Toronto 2, which is a little similar to the one that you're having here. It's like a curved LED wall. For those who are interested, we are using OptiTrack for camera tracking and Vicon, and our panels are from RAW. So this is another view of the first LED stage that Pixomondo built. It's Toronto 1. And here you can see the panels are called Row Black Pearl 2 version 2. Yeah. So I would start with a super simple introduction of virtual production, just that everybody's on the same page. So virtual production is capturing in-camera visual effects shown on an LED screen. So basically, we are replacing green screens with LED walls and showing the content that we want to have in the background in real time and filming it with a camera. So what's needed to do this is, of course, tracking the position of the camera and passing this information into a game engine that then displays the background in real time. And this, of course, has some very nice advantages over classical green screen shooting, which is once you have built this environment, your shots are basically final, and you can create as many shots as you want without additional costs. Then, of course, those screens illuminate light, and they illuminate the actors and the props. If you have a spherical LED stage, you, of course, will get correct reflections and refractions. It's easy to use practical effects like fire, smoke, whatever you want. And even like if you use fog in front of that LED screen, the light illuminates the volume, and this is way cooler than if you just have a green screen in the background. You, of course, have no spill, or at least you have spill in the color that you want. And actors can see the environment they are in. So it helps them to be in the scene. And another pro from my point of view is that creatives like producers and everybody are forced to exactly plan the shooting in advance. That means this mentality of let's fix it in post is more or less something that should not happen with virtual production, because you need to plan it until the day of the shooting, and then you get what you did. And this is also like a big disadvantage of it. So basically, whatever you came up on the day is what you get. Fixing stuff afterwards is really difficult. Of course, it's possible, but it's a waste of money, it's expensive. And then there are certain shots that virtual production simply is not good at. For example, you cannot focus on the LEDs because you will get moire-like effects. And if you do fast camera movements, because there is a delay in between the actual camera motion and it gets processed through this game engine and shown on the LED stage, you will see this offset. And this is of course, something that is a problem and disturbing. Another thing is, of course, that you can't show the ground unless you really dress it so that it seamlessly blends into the scene. And this is something that we done on this slide. So this is actually a real production image from one of the shows that are currently in production in Toronto. And as you can see here, the ground was dressed to seamlessly blend into the LED wall. And one thing that is interesting here is in order to be able to do this, it's very important that that the art department and the people like the companies who ever create the content for the stage talk very early on, because at the shoot it is not enough when more or less the props are done on the shooting day, because we need to create them in 3D as well. So I would love to show you more images like that from the productions, but as you might know, they are all under NDAs, and this is a rare case because it was released by CBS. And this is why we created like a virtual production test case for our clients, and of course also for presentations like this today, where we collaborated with the LED Cave in Mannheim. So they have also a pretty similar yeah, curved LED screen as we have it Toronto too. It's basically like the one on the right. This is what you get in Mannheim. And we collaborated with them and created our virtual production test case. And this is what I want to show you now. Do we have audio as well? Should be with audio. Can I?
So, you're with visual effects.
Exactly. What would you like to see?
Well, right now I'm thinking, what about a monk in a monastery? Yeah, that's good. But it's a bit gloomy. Can we brighten it up? Or add something shiny? No. That's not what I meant. I was thinking something slightly more modern. How about a love story? All right, but we've seen that 1,000 times.
Pretty nice frame.
I'm thinking more classic genres, like... Cheers. Now, this is all very nice, but let's address the elephant in the room. We're never showing the ground.
That's correct.
Thinking more classic genres, like... Understood. But I can change the light setting, right? I want night, please. So, you're with visual effects. You're with visual effects.
What would you like to see? Exactly.
Well...
What would you like to see?
Well, right now I'm thinking, what about a monk in a monastery? Yeah, that's good. But it's a bit gloomy. Can we brighten it up? Or add something shiny? No. That's not what I meant. I was thinking something slightly more modern. How about a love story? All right, but we've seen that 1,000 times. I'm thinking more classic genres, like... Cheers. Now, this is all very nice, but let's address the elephant in the room. We're never showing the ground.
That's correct. We would need to build the floor practically to show it.
Understood. But I can change the light setting, right? I want night, please.
Sure. Here you go.
Nice. What else can you do?
Have a look.
Yeah, now let's look a little bit behind the scenes of how we did this. So let's start with the first scene with the monk and the knight. What you're seeing now is basically the view of the Unreal operators that are sitting underneath this huge monitor. And now the camera is walking inside of that half-sphere shaped LED stage, which is pretty big, I'd say. As you can see, we used additional lights. Also, the LED is illuminating the scene, of course. We found it beneficial to add additional lighting to the scene because, I guess it helps to brighten up the actor, and it is something that you would do on a real set as well. So you would add additional lights to your to your actors and brighten up things. This is another view of another take. We used an ARRI Alexa on a techno dolly to do it. And if you have a look at the image that we're seeing, the middle part, or what the camera is pointing to, is moving together with the camera, while the outer thing is static. So it's called like the inner frustrum and the outer frustrum. The inner frustrum, let me see if I can. Yeah, the inner frustrum is basically what the camera actually is filming, and the outer frustrum is only to create lights in the scene and to for reflections. So if this would move also together with the camera, it would screw up all our reflections. Okay, here you can see it. Okay. Then we had a love story part. What we did here is we basically took the same set that we created and added a lot of props to it, like this locker and a clock and stuff to make our monastery look like a school. And exactly. And then.
Und bitte.
We used more or less a handheld camera approach to make it, because we thought that would better fit a scene in a school with young people. Exactly, so we didn't have a dolly, so we just used whatever was there. And what you see here, the only thing that is practical is one of those lockers we had on set. In this image, none of them are real, but later when the girl looks into the mirror, there we used the practical mirror, and in the background we used the stage. And then our third theme was about the cowboy. And here our goal was to play with liquids and translucent materials like the glass, and of course also use practical effects. So we used the fume smoke machine, and this really helps bringing together the foreground and the background. So this is one of the really nice things about virtual productions, that you can really use smoke machine. I mean, you could even use rain, I guess, as long as you stay away from the LED panel. Not sure if this is a good idea. Yeah, and now I want to show you how we created this, this beautiful model. So basically, there is a monastery in Maulbronn, not too far away from here, and we went there with a team of three people, having a DSLR camera each, and we took hundreds of images and measurements from those 4 hallways that were there, and threw them in a photogrammetry software called Reality Capture, and created a super detailed 3D model from, I think we used like 5,500 images in the end. Yes, and now I'm going to show you a summary. it. And now would be the time for some questions. And in the background, we are walking through this monastery in a loop. Yeah.
Okay, I'll repeat the question so the audience that is in the stream can hear them. Please, ask them.
For the last story, you had some people on the LED wall.
Yes.
These like 2D or 3D generated?
In this case,
so hold on. Let's repeat the question. The people in the love story, you were asking about foreground people and whether background people, whether they were real or CG, right?
No, in this case, it were 3D digital doubles that had like loopable animations that were walking around in the scene, more or less doing a seamless loop so that we could cut into it later in the edit as we wanted. So, yeah. Hmm?
Maybe a question not directly related to the LED wall, but to the generating of the on the screen. Since you were using photogrammetry, you also have the light information baked into the 3D model. And you showed the relighting process. How did that work?
This is true. So basically, what?
Please repeat the question. Please quickly repeat the question.
Yeah. So the question was how we basically we did the photogrammetry of the monastery and how we removed the lighting from the photogrammetry. To bake it into the textures. So basically, we did it, of course, like that. We had a piece of the monastery remodeled with low-res geometry that it could run in Unreal. Then, as a first step, reprojected those high-res textures from reality capture onto the model, and then gave it to texturing. And our texture artists removed all shadows and the light. Which was, of course, this is a manual task, and then we were able to set the light as we wanted it. Yeah.
Yeah. More questions, yeah.
When you had the monastery in the engine, did you use pre-baked lighting, or was all lighting fully lighting?
Yeah. So the question is if we use pre-baked lighting for the monastery, or if we did real-time lighting. So we baked the lights. In order to achieve that quality that we were after, we had to use baked lighting. And also a challenge is, of course, getting decent frame rates. And it's a difference if you are working on a high-end workstation or if you are throwing it onto an LED wall, because there is quite some overhead to split it on, for example, 6 different machines that feed parts of the LED wall. You lose quite a lot of frames there. So virtual production is always about getting decent frame rates. This is the biggest challenge, to be honest. Yeah.
I was wondering if you already tried to use Unreal 5 and Nanite and it changes any of your processes.
Yeah, so the question was if we already tried Unreal 5 with Lumen and Nanite. So of course internally we are testing with it, but currently from our point of view it's not safe enough to do a real production with it. But we are also looking forward to use it because it's really awesome, but not yet. Okay, so the question was, we had one locker, we bought one of those lockers for real and then remodeled or recreated that asset in 3D. And the question is if there were problems in matching it to the real locker and make it look identical. So I would say this worked out quite good. Of course, we prepared this in advance and had the locker in our office so we could measure it and have a look at it very closely. And then we created the shading inside of Unreal so that we could color tweak and tweak the contrast live on the stage when we were there, so we could match it to look as close as possible to the original one. And this was basically not too hard. So I guess we started with a good shading in Unreal.
I'd like to just personal impression from your standpoint as head of the effects. Do you think we're there yet with virtual production and achieving a believable shot, or if not, what do you think is missing? Because for me it's an interesting showcase, but it's not there yet.
Yeah. So the question is if I think that virtual production is already capable of maybe producing 100% believable images or replacing classical VFX in general. And I think it's not the answer to all VFX needs. Basically, there are certain shots that work way better than others. So, for example, if you do close-ups on people with defocused backgrounds, it will work way better than if you do wide shots. And yeah, I just think it's not the answer to all visual effects needs. It's just an additional tool, and you need to use it wisely. Yeah.
Well, thanks for that active discussion. I like that question. So let's thank the speaker one more time. Thank you, Christoph.
My pleasure.
And we'll continue with Philipp Gassmann, who will join us by Zoom now, if I am right. Yeah. Choose one of the audio conference. Okay.
All righty.
Hello, Mr. Gassmann. Can you hear us?
Hello.
Hi.
I can hear you perfectly well. And
wonderful.
Do you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. We can see you. And I would like to thank you for taking the time to be with us this evening. It's a pleasure.
Oh, pleasure. Pleasure. It's I'm sitting here in my little bunker. I call it the Corona bunker because last year, when Corona hit us, I was forced to do a lot of my teaching online. So I'm sitting here in my little studio, and I'm sorry I could not come to Ludwigsburg today, but I'm very happy and I'm very grateful that I have the opportunity to talk to this wonderful audience. Thanks for inviting me.
Please, you're an expert in green producing. I had the pleasure to speak to Philipp on another occasion, but I was impressed with all the knowledge he had on these technical aspects. Not that I think you're not a knowledgeable person, but it's more that I didn't know exactly what to expect, but it was really nice to see that you knew everything about what's happening with the big studios and big productions using that technology. Yes. So I thought it's really wonderful if with your background, if you could give us an idea of what you think, what technology might do for the good in saving CO2 footprint, but overall sustainability is a topic that is in everybody's mind, right? And it seems that there's a lot we can do in filmmaking and media production to be more sustainable.
Yes. Well, the interesting thing is last year I was sitting on a panel about sustainability, and there was one of the production managers from The Mandalorian on that same panel. And I was kind of intrigued, and I was thinking, what is he doing there? And then he said, well, one of the reasons why we did Mandalorian the way we did it was because we wanted to save CO2. And I thought that totally made sense immediately. And as you know, the biggest amount of the whole production has been done inside of the volume. So it immediately made sense to me. And then a few weeks later, I was sitting on another panel. And all of a sudden, there was a professor from a media school from Birmingham, and she was teaching Unreal Engine, and she was sitting there for the same reason, because it was about sustainability. So this kind of got me hooked up, because I thought, oh yeah, that does make a lot of sense. Because what we're talking about right now is we try to be more sustainable in our productions. And I'm a director. I'm working since 30 years as a director for TV production, big shows, and I know exactly what that means when you talk about these kind of productions. It means a lot of traveling, a lot of technology, a lot of trucks, a lot of cars, a lot of stuff that has to be pushed around. And so it made immediately sense to me that working with these new high-tech technologies, we can definitely enter a new realm of production, a new way to make movies, and at the same time also save a lot of traveling, save a lot of all these emissions we have due to the size that we encounter now with a lot of production. So if you're familiar with these huge monster productions, we're not talking about 20, 30 people traveling around. We're talking about a few hundred people traveling around. I spoke with people who were working on, for instance, Game of Thrones. I mean, they had to transport literally thousands of lights to Africa to stage all these things. And you can imagine you also had to transport an enormous amount of equipment over there. So now talking about these new technologies gives us the chance to save all that. And also, as we just saw in the presentation before, also do new things we were not able to do before. So I think this mixture is very interesting. So maybe just to give you a little idea about the impact we have, because I think this is something people usually don't know. And we as a media industry, before we were starting with films, then came TV, but now it's an entire media industry. And we know that now there's more and more being produced. There's more and more programs that are being made. The market is literally flooded with programs. So the sad thing on one end is that our emissions, the emissions we do have as an industry, our emissions are going up through the ceilings, meaning our emissions are getting higher and higher and higher, which is quite sad because in other industries, the emissions are going down. The other industries or many other industries make a lot of efforts to cut down on their CO2 emissions, while in our case, the emissions go up. So of course, I always say, careful, careful, we're gonna get caught. Somebody will see this, somebody will realize this. And now we do see this because, for instance, the European Union has realized this issue and the government has realized this issue. So now all of a sudden, we see a new situation. We see that all of a sudden, sustainable productions are becoming mandatory. All of a sudden, we have to produce or make movies in a more sustainable way. So that's interesting because on one hand, this will give you, the creators, another good reason to work with these new technologies because they are really helping us in these sustainable issues. So I just want to give you a few little ideas or a few little things that I encountered the last weeks. And one very interesting thing I've been encountering was an Italian production. I don't know if you've heard about it. It's called Romulus. Romulus, it's with the Romans fighting and all these kind of crazy things. It's a big Sky production. And they had big sustainable issues because they were making this big production all over Italy. And I spoke with the sustainability manager and he said, Philip, we had thousands of transportation of people, transportation, material transportation from one end to the other of Italy. And the director of that production, he said, listen, I'm not doing this any longer. This is crazy. You know, it's a crazy enterprise. And at the same time, Sky said, we want a green production. Sky, in fact, is asking for green productions. If now you are a producer and you want to make a movie for Sky, you have to produce this movie in a sustainable way. It's mandatory. It's part of the contract. You don't get paid if you don't do it in a green way. So they started acting in a very creative way. And that for me is the interesting thing about this topic. It's a creative revolution that we need because of course, we all know there's little tricks we can do here and there, and we can try to save energy, we can try to save in different areas, but we also need to produce, to create in a different way. And that's the interesting thing about this whole sustainability issue. It's a creative issue. It's a creativity issue. And that's what I found extremely interesting and also fun about this whole topic. So what did our friends from Romulus do? They found a quarry, a place nearby Rome, and they put all the sets in this one area And they started working with new technologies. They started working with different production methods. And just to give you an idea, they built these different villages that are part of Romulus. They built them all in there. But they also started working with all kinds of tricks, with all kinds of new tools to be able to make this kind of production just in one set. So the next thing that happened this year was another production. And I don't know if you've heard about it. It's a huge series that's being produced. It's called The Swarm. And those of you who are familiar with the book, it's a very famous novel that's been turned into a series. And as you all know, or those people who know about this book is playing in Norway, it's in Canada, it's in France. So basically, this would be the typical travel production. Normally, you would have hundreds of people flying around the world doing this massive series that, as I said, is really a huge international travel production. So what did these guys decide? They said, no, let's try to make this entire production just in one country. So what did they do? They went to Italy. I don't know why it was Italy again, but Italy, of course, offers a lot of interesting spots. And they found basically pretty much everything there that looks somewhat like all these different countries. So they found places that look like Norway, places that look like Canada, but of course it was not perfect. They needed some additional stuff. So they started working with set extensions. They started working with all kinds of digital tricks to turn these different places into a Canadian place, into a Norwegian place, into a French place, you name it, all the places that were needed for this kind of a production. So again, you see, these guys were thinking creatively in terms of how can we do this? And as I said, they were using an extremely amount of tricks, of new ways how to make movies, how to produce these movies. And I found that extremely interesting. At the very end, another production that I got in touch with this year was a Netflix production in Berlin. And as you all know, Netflix decided to be CO2 neutral by the end of next year. So you can imagine what this kind of thinking and what these goals inside, what these goals are asking for. So again, Netflix and the production company, they were looking for a better way to make this huge production. It's a big production. It's basically playing on sea, it's on a big boat. And same thing, they built in Berlin pretty much the equivalent to the volume, and they started manufacturing, producing, filming this movie that basically most of the time is on this boat and on sea. And they made most of the movie in this volume in Berlin due to also this idea of let's save CO2, but also because the director said, hey, this is such an interesting new technology. It's such a new idea and such a new way to produce, to manufacture movies. I would like to do it. And that's the last part of my little presentation. The last part is I find it extremely interesting because basically it's a big challenge for everybody. Everybody has to change his or her mindset. The cameramen have to think differently. The lighting people have to think differently, but also the storytellers, the authors, everybody has to work differently and think differently. But at the same time, everybody has new ideas, has new possibilities, has new ways how to make a movie. So this is, for me, a perfect combination. On one end, it's sustainable, and on the other end, it's extremely creative. And on the very third and last end, it requires people who are able to do it. And that's something that I'm pretty much preaching everywhere. I see, let's train people. We need to train people. And everybody who is on these new technologies, everybody who is able to handle these new technologies, who's able to work with these new technologies, in my modest opinion, has a far better chance to have a success and to have a good job, have a good perspective, a good future in this business. And that's my recommendation to everybody, to dig deep into these things because they're sustainable, they're creative, and they're extremely interesting on the long run. So that's my little message from Munich. Thanks for allowing me to say these few things. I hope they were useful. And if there's any questions, you're more than welcome to ask them. Thank you very much.
Well, thanks for sharing these insights and these opinions. It sounds to me like a bit of a revolution. Are you getting a lot of positive feedback? I know you're teaching a lot and you're meeting a lot of students, a lot of people that want to be creative as a profession. So what is your feedback from these people?
Well, I see, and that's very interesting, because what we need now in every sense of the word. We see what's happening right now in Glasgow. We see that the old systems are coming to an end. We need to think about new systems in every sense of the word. And that's also the case for our industry, you know. And I do see this as a big chance. And it's quite interesting. Frank Schätzing, the author of The Swarm, he was on a talk show 2 days ago, and he said, well, you know, taking this challenge as a creative champion is fun, you know, and I think that's a very important thing. Usually when you talk about sustainability, people are like getting scared and they think it's somewhat like a prison. It's going to be dark and we're not going to have any fun anymore. Things will be terrible. Our lives will be miserable. And my feeling is, if we take these challenges as a creative challenge, and if we realize that there's a lot of new opportunities due to the new tools that we're gaining right now, that we're having right now, it could be an enormous step forward. And I think we as a movie industry, we as a creative industry, we do have a very, very, very significant impact in general. And I think combining these things, you know, and saying, okay, let's work with new technologies that have this sustainable aspect. And at the same time, let's start telling new stories. Let's start maybe also invent new stories that also have this creative potential, and also maybe show to people new ways of living, new ways of doing things. If we bring this all together, I think it can be a big, big, big revolution indeed. And I do see that a lot of young people, when they hear about this in this way, they all say, let's go for it, you know, let's do it. And I think that's wonderful. That's a nice response that I get a lot of times.
I'm very, I mean, we've been looking into these technologies for quite some time, maybe when people were still looking at, for instance, real-time technology as something that, this applies to games. I'm doing film, you know, it's changed, but it changed fundamentally. It's gone. It really is since maybe 20 months or 24 months, I would say. And also COVID did something to it, right? People were forced to use other tools to produce, and it seemed to be like just accelerating the whole effort to, can we rethink the way we do the things, right?
Absolutely. I mean, there's things that I think 2 years ago, people would have chopped our heads off if we would have said, let's do this, you know, or let's try this. I give you another example. You know, I'm doing a lot of shows, TV shows, stuff like that. We now even found ways to do these shows remotely. So there's a show that's being done last year. The lighting designer, he was sitting in New York. The sound designer, he was sitting in Vienna. The guys who were responsible for the content, they were in Berlin, and the studio was somewhere in the middle of Germany, and they did a live show. You know, and same thing, you know, it's something that needs to be learned. That's something that needs to be trained, and people need to lose their fears. You know, I know there's a lot of fear, and fear is the worst engine we have. And when it comes to all these new things, we need to lose those fears. We need to try and play with these things. I always tell people, start playing with these things. Try it, go to the limits, check them out, because there's so much more that we can learn. And I think here the young generation definitely has a huge chance, because a lot of old people, not everybody, but a lot of people are scared. I mean, we all know that. I'm an old guy. I'm a little fortunate because I've always been somewhat kind of adventurous. But I think this is the big chance for the young generation. And I can only invite you and say, go for it, try these things, you know, and go to the limits, check them out. And I'm sure there's a lot that can be done.
Very encouraging words. Thank you so much. Maybe we have time for 1 or 2 more questions from the audience, please. Yeah.
Could you possibly go into a bit more detail on those 2 productions in Italy you mentioned, on what tools and techniques they actually used other than like digital set extensions?
So the question is, did you understand the question? Okay, good.
No. Just
so the question was on the Italy production that you were referring to. Could you say a few more examples of how they were creatively using this village set other than set extension, right?
Yes. Well, they used a lot of new technologies. I mean, I'll tell you, they used, for instance, a lot of new LED technologies, like LED lighting, you know, which in return allowed them to use a lot or to need a lot less power. They put up a huge photovoltaic system there. So during the day, they were storing energy, and at night they had big batteries. So they worked basically a lot with batteries, so they could reduce all these different energy systems and of course reduce generators, which are usually a big source of emissions. So that was one thing they did a lot, working on lighting, but also when it comes to set construction, when it comes to all the materials they were using, they tried to work with different new materials and also sustainable materials. So that was also something they worked a lot on, but it was the entire storytelling, you know, that they've been working on. How can you realize a story, a great story? And in fact, the series is better now. It's even better now than before, you know, because of course people were forced to rethink things. And I think that's always a nice thing when you're forced to rethink things, you know. I see a lot of big production, people are like used to this, you know. So they get, I'm not saying lazy, but there's not too much creativity in there. But if all of a sudden you have a new challenge and you tell people, listen, now the setup is not the entire Italy, we cannot film everywhere. The setup now is this one place, and that's all we have. And that's when people get very creative. It's very interesting to see that, you know, when you force them to dig deep into the topic in one place or in one specific topic, that's usually when people get a lot more creative than if you tell them, well, anything is possible, you can travel everywhere you want, et cetera, et cetera. That's easy, you know, but it's more challenging this way. And it's very interesting and also very rewarding when you see how much people then engage in these kind of productions and that the result in the end often gets better than before.
Okay, maybe one more question from the audience here. I'll check the live chat. No. Yeah, Tony.
I was wondering, do you have any insights in the energy consumption on a classical VFX heavy production? So how much more, what is more expensive, like the actual shoot, the production, or the post-production with thousands of rendering hours?
Okay, the question is related to traditional visual effects production,
yes.
Not making use of virtual production technology in energy consumption, and where amounts of money go to in the production process, and then probably compared also to potential of new ways of producing it, right?
Yes, yes. Well, you know, it's difficult to say at this very moment because we're just entering this new stage of different kinds of technologies. But I'll give you one example. I'm sure you're familiar with these old tricks when you have a car driving down the street. You have to put the car on a transportation item like a wagon, and then you have to drive the car down the streets. There's a camera, there's lighting, there's all these people. So now some people, and I'm sure some of you have seen this, they work with what we call plates. It's just small LED monitors. And so you put the car in the studio, you put these plates, these monitors around the studio. You might install a projection screen above the car and project the driving scene as well, so you get the reflections on the windows. And now it's very funny. We started doing these things 2 or 3 years ago. At the very beginning, people were kind of suspicious because, well, does it really look good? Is it really good to do it this way? But now all of a sudden, we realize that we do save a lot of money, for instance, if we do this properly, because it's very controllable. You can do any kind of weather, you can do any kind of lighting situation, you can repeat things eternally, if you will, and that's exactly what's happening inside of the volume and all these things. That basically situations that for us in normal productions can be extremely expensive and demanding, and we only have a limited amount of time, all of a sudden these things can be tackled, can be done in a different way. Still, we don't have a lot of comparisons, a lot of numbers that we can put side by side, and that's what we urgently need. So for instance, I've been talking to this Netflix production in Berlin. I said, hey, let's check the numbers, let's check the electricity consumption, let's check the costs, and let's really try in the coming months to come up with good numbers, because that's of course what we need. At the very end, there's always going to be somebody who wants to see numbers. But I'm very confident that, first of all, these technologies will evolve. It'll get faster, they'll become quicker. I'm sure at the very end, we will not always need these huge setups. The setups will get smaller, they will get cheaper in terms of setting them up, working with them. So I think it's a very, very interesting technology. And as I said, we need to do research. And I think, again, that might be also a job for you at the academies to also look into these things and really try to get down to good numbers at the very end so that we are able to really compare, you know.
Absolutely, and I can say that we are on this topic. So just to add for the audience, so we're doing this set extension workshop every year, and this year you're going to measure the energy consumption by the wall. And I just thought that what we could do, just in order to get some numbers up, we can look into the older offline productions, you know, and then let's see how much render time we used. And then, I mean, you know, it's more or less a rough number, but you know, it's exactly the thing. We need to know more about the consumption, and then we can judge on what do the tools need to be in order to be really sustainable and in order to really do green productions. But we're on this, yeah. It's all lined up, and I think a lot of people. I've been trying to get these numbers. And there's a lot of reports out on CO2 footprint for traditional filmmaking, and it is big. There's this Albertson report on a tentpole production, and it's big, yeah. So. We're on this, we're trying to contribute, and we'll share these numbers with everybody as soon as we have them. Yeah.
That's great, because, you know, at the very end, and I think there, again, there's a lot of opportunity in there, because I see, you know, when I was in school, I was very bad in mathematics, and I was terrible. But now I love numbers. I started to love numbers because I saw when you go to somebody and say, oh, it's more green. They will say, okay, well, it's more green. But if you go there and you have numbers with you, CO2 numbers, costs, and all this other stuff, it's a lot easier. You get in a much better way in a conversation, and you'll be much more comfortable with all these things. And we do see there's so much significant advantages in what we're now doing with all these new technologies. And we do see that as soon as people realize all these different effects, and as soon as they realize the numbers and the benefits, they will go for it. And they will even be willing to invest significant amounts of money if they see what at the end, what's the result in the very end, you know? So it's a big process. It's a very interesting process, a very challenging process. And I'm very happy that you're on this, you know, and I wish you very much luck tonight. And I hope you still have a good night and some other interesting conferences. And please keep working on this. It's extremely important.
Yeah, thanks for your positive spirit and for this great outlook into the future. And thank you for your time, Philip. We'll catch up anytime later.
Soon. Perfect. Thank you so much. Have fun. Take care. Bye-bye.
Really great honor to have Philip be available this evening. Yeah, we'll continue with the productions of Filmakademie, and the first team that will present now is the set extension workshop team, and I think we'll have the presentation up there in a moment, and you're ready to go.
Hello everyone, I'm Philip Dörrer, and this is Benjamin Gassmann, and we are the VFX supervisors on this year's set extension workshop. Just a few words about the set extension workshop. So the set extension workshop is an interdisciplinary workshop where the cinematography students, the production design and the visual effects students work together on a very VFX heavy production. This is really important to get all this, the story and the visual concepts and all this stuff done early. So we have to work together from the very beginning. Then when story and all these things are set, production design starts building the set while cinematography and VFX start working on storyboard, animatic and previs. And then we have normally 1 day of shooting with blue screen and green screen, and we also use have already used some virtual production tools in the past. But since last year, we also used the LED wall. And this year's LED wall is also a little bit bigger than the last year. So we have a little bit more room to play with that. And now Benny is going to talk about this year's story.
Exactly. So yeah, in this year's set extension workshop, our story takes place in a gigantic ice cave. And the logline for our story goes like: disoriented, the leader of the Valkyrie wakes up in an abandoned ancient temple embedded in an ice cave where she discovers the source of her people's strength. And for our concept and with the use of the LED wall, we want to convey the vastness of the cave and already have it shown on set. We will also implement daylight and make use of the advantages of the LED wall, that we don't have to color key green screen or blue screens. So our protagonist will have long open hair and snow particles, which could get a little messy in front of green or blue screens. We will also use dynamic lighting with the independent LED panels you can see at the side, as well as DMX lights linked to Unreal. We will also use reflections and make use of interactivity between the motion capture system and the LED wall. And yeah, we're currently in pre-production, so we will now present our previous and TechVis setup.
So for our previous and TechVis setup, which had to be done to really get a feel of how the production is actually going to work on set, we had to prepare everything before the November 24th, so it's already coming up in 2 weeks. And therefore we had to have a really, really interactive system. We had to communicate with production design and with camera all the time. And therefore we used Blender's Eevee. And this was a really good idea because then we were able to use interactive shaders, which enabled us to get a lot of measurements and a lot of visualizations of stuff that was otherwise not possible in real time. Yeah, and also we got a mock-up of the Albrecht Ade studio, which also really helped us to get everything, all the measurements, really correct. And we also used a separate environment scene, on the technical side. So we were able to iterate on our environment while still being able to work without any interference of the artists on the real production. So camera people were able to move the camera around while the background scene that you would see on the LED wall was still updated all the time. And now Benny is going to talk with you how exactly this looked like.
Yeah, so for the capabilities of our setup, as Philip already mentioned, one key part was the measurement system. So we could provide measurements to production design and cinematography. And we have measurements always visible in the setup. And we always see the distances between the LED wall and the camera, the LED wall and the actress and the camera, and as well as the camera height. And in this setup, we used a shader for the LED content, which allowed us to have visible content when it is in view, in camera view, and it becomes semi-transparent when it's not in view. We always have the camera frustum visible, so we also can see what parts of the set are in view, and we implemented various warning systems. For example, an LED edge warning system, so we could also always see if we would go beyond the LED wall and avoid that. We also have a warning system for the motion capture volume, so we don't lose connection to the motion capture system, which is tracking the camera, as well as a warning system for the camera focus, so we can avoid Mori effects. And all these warning systems were really important to make sure that all shots work in our setup with the distances. For example, the actress has to be like 2 to 3 meters away from the LED wall. And everything had to be interactive to enable for real-time feedback and to easily test doability. And here's an example of a final previous and TechVis shot. And in this shot, we have the illusion of the camera orbiting around the protagonist In fact, she's just standing on a turntable, which we have an object tracker on it, which is linked to the Unreal scene. So the LED content will move on the LED wall, and we have the illusion of the camera orbiting around her.
And we are currently finishing up asset production. We are using Houdini to create an extensive amount of geometry and assets really fast and procedurally. And we are also placing them via a VR setup, where we are using virtual production to where we're using VR to place the assets in real time, which is really helpful for like to get the right feel of actually placing the assets like you would on set. And yeah, this is our VFX team, and thank you for your attention.
Yeah, thank you. And next up is final year project Cyber City Love Story.
Hi, I'm Kadi Coco. I am the creator and director of Cyber City Love Story, which is a transmedia series where each episode consists of a live action part that is succeeded by a virtual reality experience, in which the users are able to follow our main character Elaine into the virtual game world called Cyber City. This inherent immersion of VR allows us to integrate our game part as a part of the story and not just as a simple game add-on to the series. We actually won in the beginning of this year, we won the Aurea Award, and we were able to get financed by Magnext, which allowed us to produce or to start our production into Cyber City Love Story. So we are actually in the middle of it, but more on that later. First, please follow me into the world of Elaine. The year is 2094, and Elaine lives a regular life of a teenage girl, except that she lives on Mars, and her best friend is an advanced AI named Anna. So 6 decades ago, the first human settlement landed on Mars, and they started forming a colony which thrives now and becomes a kind of small town, basically like Ludwigsburg. While Elaine tries to prove herself to her mentor in her botanical class, her own mother commits a life-changing crime against the colony by manipulating the files of the ANA system. So as Elaine takes the challenge of her classmates a bit too serious and actually goes out illegally on the Martian surface, the events begin to spiral. Her mom is caught by authorities from the Martian government, and she's unable to say goodbye to her daughter, who meanwhile finds herself in detention and discovers an old virtual reality headset, which she puts on and finds herself in the virtual reality game called Cyber City. So here she and her AI, Anna, actually experience the abundance of adventure that Elaine was longing for all her life, for better or worse. And in this opening episode that we are now producing, we capture the core of Elaine's journey. So a Martian girl who wishes for nothing more than to experience an Earth that she has never set foot on, and bizarrely she finds this freedom not in a real world, but in this forgotten game world called Cyber City, where anything is possible, where dangers lurk around every corner, and where no one can be trusted. Or so it seems. So yesterday, we actually finished our first shooting block, and here are some sets from some stills of our physical sets. And in December, we'll even go further and use the LED wall technology to expand our sets to accommodate this fully fledged botanical base. And finally, we'll even stand on Mars, where Elaine will take her walk. And now Eddie will tell you more about that, because, spoiler alert, we obviously didn't travel to Mars.
Hi there. My name is Eddie Schäfer. I'm a student of interactive media here at Animationsinstitut, and I'm the game director of the VR experience Carly told you about. But I'm also responsible for the environmental art, which we're going to use for the shots with the LED wall. For us, the LED wall is like a perfect bridge between live-action film and VR experience, as we use Unreal Engine in both cases. And as Carly mentioned, we're going to shoot in early December. So we have planned like 3 distinct ways how we want to use the LED wall, and so I gave you some insights about that. The first use we want to have is like extending our build set of the botanical lab. In order to match the real set to the LED wall, we imported a CAD file from our production designer AMCRS and made it cleaner and optimized it like in Blender to have a production-ready 3D model for Unreal Engine. Then we photographed the walls from our real set, which you can see here and here from our shooting, to match like the real wall textures from our real set and dress it into the digital set. So we created like some textures and maps, tileable textures and maps, like normal maps and roughness maps to get this feel. Then we also remodeled the plants, which were designed by our production design team, and added some pre-made plants from asset stores to give them more greenery into the botanical lab to give it more life. And we also had an approach with digital humans where we used Reallusion's character creator and the auto setup tool for Unreal to have a very fast workflow to get digital humans into the scene, because we will have to wait until like the actors arrive and we have the final fitting, so we can 3D scan the final costumes of the actors, remodel them into like low poly objects, and dress our digital actors with the final costumes. So we will have a fast workflow prepared for that. And then you can see like a lighting setup with an artificial sun, which is bound to the whole lighting setup in the greenhouse, which will be animated by this Unreal sequencer. So we will use like the Unreal Engine remote, or maybe also specific key bindings to animate that. The second use case we have is like the Mars and the exterior atmosphere. Because Carly set our base station at the Valles Marineris, which is like a giant canyon with I think a length of 800 miles or kilometers, so it's very gigantic. We used a 3D scan which is provided by NASA of the real canyon there. And so we set up the base, did a little bit of terraforming to dress our environment a little more appealing for us, and started populating it with Megascan assets. We built additional models, we built custom decals, we blended textures, just so we get a nice atmosphere together, and added some fog on cards to be a little more performant on that, to get our atmosphere right. At the end, we had a post-processing volume to tie the scene together and to achieve this gloomy look which we are looking for. You can see here and there. And because we are producing on VR, we also had a Quest 2, which we like just linked up to Unreal Engine with Wi-Fi. So there's a beta version of Airlink we use for that, and a room scale setup. So our director of photography, our director, our production designer, and me could literally do a little walk on Mars, so we could look at the scenery from the right perspective. And finally, we have a third use, which is the apolitical speech, which we filmed or tested out yesterday. And it was like, first we wanted to do it like in front of a green screen, because it becomes a footage which we want to, you know, like implement like on a TV inside a series. But then we said like, we don't want to do a green screen, we want to have a dynamic background. And as Unreal Engine is here used in virtual production, but also is still a game engine, there was no reason for us not to use the game input mechanics. So we built a custom shader with exposed parameters, hooked up an Xbox controller to it and gave it to the director, and so the environment in our shots could react to the actor's speech in real time through the hands of our director in real time, yes. Yeah, so this was basically our insight into our project, and thank you for your attention, and I hand over to Simon Spielmann. Thanks.
So, yeah, hello. First of all, big thank you for these nice presentations to our students. My name is Simon Spielmann. I am the principal R&D engineer here at Filmakademie Institute of Animation, or Animationsinstitut, I should say. Yeah, first of all, I would like to give you some more insights of the stage we set up here within the last 2 weeks, basically. You can see it here. So we're sitting in front of the screen, which is 4 by 10 meters, as a curved screen. We have also 3 additional lighting panels because, like you maybe can imagine, even with a screen with this size, it's not enough to illuminate a whole scenery or a whole set. So we came up with the idea to also add some smaller, but also lighter, brighter LED elements you could place somewhere in their scenery, which are also, of course, combined with the content of the engine to illuminate the scenery. Some details. So the screen itself is made out of a pattern of these displays. Basically, you can see here. So the whole resolution of the whole screen is 5,120 by 2084 pixels and a color depth of 10 bit, and therefore made of 20 by 8 individual panels with a pixel pitch of 1.9 millimeters. So for the capturing, for virtual production, you basically need to capture the camera because you want to be able to track the camera and adapt the frame you render out to display on a screen that it looks like not a screen, but much more like a door into a virtual world, and therefore you need to know the coordinates from the camera to change the perspective the camera sees and to render the specific image. Therefore, we're using this mocap system, which is set up here. It's all around us already running, or still running. It consists of 24 cameras, which are usually working in that way that it illuminates the scenery and the cameras just see the markers which are on top of the camera. You can see it over there. It's usually these typical motion capture markers, which are reflective. Some more details to this later on, because we had to change it, because with a classical setup, you run in some problems because of reflections and stuff like this. For rendering, we are using Unreal Engine. All devices are here synced with a global house lock. That's important to avoid any frame stutters or artifacts in the image. And to further extend the lighting of this whole scenery, we also added some DMX lights, which are also controllable by the engine in terms of color to further extend the volume we can illuminate. Yeah, about the tracker, I already mentioned it. So usually you would use a tracker which is passive. That means the camera, the mocap camera itself illuminates the whole scenery, and the tracker then only reflects the light into this direction so that the camera only sees this tracker. But you will end up with a lot of reflections, especially with a more complex set. In a scenery like this, it's totally fine, but if you have more set elements, then you have really, or you will run into a lot of problems with shading or shaded areas or reflections on the floor, which will end up in stuttery and unprecise tracking of your camera. So therefore, there are usually also commercial solutions to this, which were not available yet. So you can order them, but you have to take on account a lot of days and months of shipping and wait for it. So we came up with our own solution. Basically, we just put some infrared LEDs in a marker order on a small structure on the camera. You can see it on the image. You can also see it. This image is shot with an infrared sensitive camera. They're really bright, illuminated in the infrared spectrum so that these cameras can see it. With a diffuser on top of all these sticks, then also acting like an usual marker, but in this way, or in this case, it's self-illuminated, so we don't have any reflections caused by a huge illumination of all these cameras in the room. That's basically battery powered and then good to go. So, next, some words to our own in-house development here, VPAD. So it's already 2.0, so maybe for those of you who don't know about VPAD, it's basically an open source collaborative tool to allow real-time set editing in an intuitive way or manner. So basically, you can think about like in remote control to control virtual scene elements on a set. So idea is to really have a simple user interface, which also non-expert users can use. You can download it on a tablet or even on your phone. And then with these tools, which are, by the way, engine agnostic, that means we are not bound to any specific engine like Unreal or something like this. You could also use it in Unity or even Blender or Unreal, or even use it to connect these engines to each other. And then it's also not a monolithic system. That doesn't mean that you run it on one tablet. The idea behind is there's really a tablet is just a client, and you could have a lot of clients all over the world because it's, if you like, because it's connected via network or internet, and you could then achieve also to connect several stages all over the globe to collaborate together to modify one scene. That's basically the idea behind VPET. Now in the phase 2.0, because we, well, like it is with the first version of software, you have to redesign it at some point that you really can further push it. And we did this, and it's ongoing, really looking forward to really have a first beta release in early 2022. For more information about this, you can go to vpet.research.animationsinstitut.de. Yeah, as I said, it's an open development. The whole source code is open, and I would really like to see some more feedback and collaboration there. So that's basically it from my side. And now I hand over to Volker again.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, thank you so much. I think we have time for a few more questions for the Film Academy presentation slot, and anybody wants to ask anything about Cyber City Love Story, the set extension workshop. There is one question coming from the stream. Is a person who is considering building a virtual production stage in this area, asking particularly Film Academy if we would be able to contribute or to exchange knowledge. So I think it's partly answered by Simon's presentation already. So pretty much everything we do is open source and is kind of applicable to evaluate for professional use. So, but beyond that, of course, we'd be interested in knowing what you're planning, and let's exchange information here. More questions? Let me take a look into the chat. Yeah, Andreas.
I have a question to the set extension workshop. They said that they use EV for the previs and thickness, and also for calculating lights. I thought the light coming into the scene. I was wondering if it was not better to use a ray tracing solution for this.
Okay, the question is for the set extension workshop and related to using Eevee and whether or not using other renderers would give a more faithfully light representation than Eevee as a renderer?
Yeah, we also thought about this, but since it's basically a visualization for how the shot setup would work, we didn't see the need to implement ray tracing. So also the lights are just like stand-in lights. So it's not really an accurate representation of the of how the light is going to work later on set.
Yeah.
Second question would be, with all these tools developed to have warnings, do you run the warnings all the time basically, or what is the field work?
Just repeat the question.
So the question is with how the warning systems work if they are triggered all the time, correct? So yeah, they are running all the time. They are basically position and rotation based. So you can trigger them real time, but in the previs you don't actually see them because it's just warning systems for setting up the shots. But yeah, it's all interactive and.
Does it feel more like a creative or technical challenge to work around these limitations, or did it feel like a normal thing you work?
The question is if the warning systems were avoiding creativity or blocking creativity, and I would say definitely not, because we could like really quick test the shot setups. For example, we could gather around with production design and cinematography and just see how the combination of everything works, and really quickly find solutions. So it was really, really helpful.
How was your design workflow in order to get like a congruent look between real life props and the digital work? As I think you were basically working with like two different designers for production design and someone designing virtual work. How did these people get along? How did that work?
Do you want to answer that? Okay.
Maybe I can answer. Maybe I can answer the question. Basically, it's that we had like a feedback back and forth between production design and VFX, where we also use photogrammetry to. Now it's working. Where we have like a feedback loop between production design and VFX, where we use photogrammetry to scan our assets and bring them into our world, and we have like really precise plans and designs of how those things are going to look like, and we kind of like send them back and forth between these departments to like really achieve a cohesive look. Because of course one of the main issues also with the LED wall is that since it's emitting light, it's also changing the look of the objects in front of the wall. So therefore we kind of like have to compensate for all these things. So this is already a step that you have to think about when you're designing these objects. It's like, where are they going to be put? And how does this actually transition into the wall? So also, for example, we have rocks lying around in our scene, and of course this rocks has to match up. So we like have a really tight connection with production design of how are they going to build these rocks and how are our rocks going to look like. Because otherwise, of course, they don't match up. Does this answer your question?
Yeah, I think, but especially in your case, who kind of took the lead on the overall look of your project?
No, that's not actually correct. We did not like take over the lead just because we produce all the assets, but it was actually that we had like we like appointed an art director at our side, and also like the production design had like a head that kind of like connected with each other, and then they did designs together so that there's like a real cohesive design. Because if you have like one design that's working on the digital side and one design is working on the real side, of course you would immediately get not like the same result. So everything had to be like directed from the same perspective, otherwise you would of course run into the problem of having different styles.
More questions? Yes, please.
I would be interested if you will use your warning system when you actually shoot. So will you like pass the data of the camera position into your system and it will warn you that you maybe left your tracking area or something, or is it just for quick visualization and planning the shooting?
Please repeat the question.
So the question was if the previs and TechVis setup is actually implemented in the real shoot as well. So like if the warning systems for our tracking volume would also show up if we would like go out of the volume with the camera. Currently it's not planned, since we are also like we have a really tight schedule on shots anyway. So for this environment it doesn't make a lot of sense to like even like put it into this as well. But of course we also have a really good estimate of how the shots are going to work now, since we use our TechVis to like we already have all our shots locked by now. So we really know, okay, this is going to happen here, this is going to happen there. We have some flexibility with some shots, of course, like we still have some room to play around, but in general all shots are planned in a way that they are able to be shot on site without any interference. So that was like basically the idea with the warning system, so that we like when we are in planning, that everything is planned beforehand to such an extent that we don't get into troubles when we're shooting.
yeah, so also the warning system was more like to plan everything in advance. So because when you're on set, you can actually just change lenses and see if it's working. But in advance, it's really helpful if you can already test that in the pre-production, and camera and pre-production can rearrange some things to make this certain look to make it work with like a certain lens, and we can adjust the positions and distances. Yeah.
Okay, and maybe have a final question from the audience. I don't see anything in the live chat. Yes, Andrea.
One more question to this warning system. Do you think if you would do now another production with a different screen size and studio size, other demands, would it be something that you could like put into a tool and then just apply some sliders to the different production, or would it be basically you have to reprogram everything?
No, absolutely. It could work also for other setups. I mean, for like the LED edge warning, it makes sense for this setup because we only have this curved screen, and we could go beyond. But if we have like a cave, this system wouldn't be really helpful because there are screens everywhere. But stuff like the motion capture warning system, I think this is really helpful in all kinds of cases. So, and it's also adjustable. So,
yeah, maybe also to add on to that, since the shaders are all like interactive, it doesn't really matter like what we applied on. They would still work the same way because the system is all like set up via like interactive shaders. Yeah. They are only taking position information. So if you change the scale of something, you just have to adjust for the scale, but you don't have to like redo everything. It's all like linked into each other. It's just information that's being displayed, basically.
Fantastic. Well, thanks to everybody for their contribution and for making this a very interesting evening. I have a few more informations for you. If I could get the next slide, please, before we come to an end. So here are 3 reasons why, for anyone in the audience, if you're interested in studying in this creative area, why to come and study at Filmakademie. So first of all, the project-oriented studies. At Filmakademie, it's really about learning by doing and hands-on from the first moment. The second reason is that we don't have a tuition fee for the EU postgraduate students, and there's a relatively small fee of 1,500 euros for non-EU students. And let me emphasize that anybody looking into the stream or the recording that we'll publish afterwards, please feel welcome to get in contact with us. We're very interested in diversity. We have a lot of students from all over the world, from Brazil, from Africa, from South America, and it's been a really wonderful experience having these people here. So if you haven't known that you can study here, then you should contact us. And then there's a top networking opportunity. That's because we bring in a lot of industry lecturers at Filmakademie, and also because we have FMX, our own conference. And by the way, FMX 2022 will be a hybrid event. It will be on-site in Stuttgart, Haus der Wirtschaft, May 3rd till 5th, and online on May 6th. And actually, these are 3 reasons, but I think there's 999 reasons why you should come and study here. Next slide, please. If you're interested, apply before February 14th. You can get all the information about the application process on our website, www.animationsinstitut.de. So this wraps the Tech Talks, and I would like to cast a special thank you to the R&D team and involved students for the whole setup. It's been tough work during the last weeks. And of course, the streaming team, thank you so much for your effort this evening. A very special thank you go to Eventtech and Let It Go for the LED wall setup. And of course, TechTalks Stuttgart is an event by Animation Media Cluster Region Stuttgart, MFG, Media and Film Society Baden-Württemberg, Film Commission Region Stuttgart, which usually hosts a location in Stuttgart where we have these Tech Talks, Media Solution Center Baden-Württemberg, and the program is put together by Filmakademie Baden-Württemberg's Animationsinstitut and Hochschule der Medien Stuttgart Media University. So if you're interested, please subscribe to our YouTube account and get in contact with us. We're always looking for interesting topics and speakers and feedback from the audience. That's it for today. Thanks for being with us. Good night.